Hello, and welcome to another Poetry Anthology poem for Year 10. This one's Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney. And we'll start off by looking, and again, if you want to do the task, it's kind of up to you, the notes come next. In the lesson, if I was teaching this, we'd start off with the task that's on the board at the moment. Fear, what are we scared of? So start off by thinking, what are you scared of? Then it says the challenge is separate into two, maybe your own fears and then the ones that people in the wider world fear. And then how many of them are rational or manageable? Now, rational means ones that, if you're scared of, for example, snakes, it's quite rational because they can hurt you. Manageable being the idea that, there are certain fears that we can do something about. So, for example, if you're scared of heights, you don't go up to top of tall buildings, for example. As always, you've got about 5 minutes, I'd say, to do the task, but 5 seconds in the video. Now, Storm on the Island is very similar in some ways to London and Ozymandias in as much as it's quite short and the actual narrative behind it is quite straightforward, which means that for me it's quite a core one for you to learn and understand and know what's going on. I'll read it out. As you can see, there's some tricky vocabulary, so therefore there's some examples of a glossary on the right-hand side. But as you would do normally, just, as I read along, start to think, what do you think it's about? In some ways, the clue is in the title, it's Storm on the Island, but maybe think about what he's trying to say about this storm. We are prepared. We build our houses squat, sink walls in rock, and roof them with good slate. The wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so as you can see, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. You know what I mean, leaves and branches can raise a chorus in a gale, so you can listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. You might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs. But no, when it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. We just sit tight while wind dives and strafes invisibly. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded by the empty air. Strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. So have a bit of a think about what you think the poem might be about. As I said, beyond the fact that it is obviously about a storm on an island. The next slide will look at some of the context behind Seamus Heaney, the poet himself. So this is boiled down to very, very straightforward context. Because again, you don't need to remember every little bit of context about someone, but anything that might be relevant to what they're writing about would be useful. So I've kind of summed it down here into 3 things. He was born in Ireland, so Storm on the Island, in the title, links to his home country effectively. He grew up in a farming community, so he wrote about a lot of rural things, about nature, and he linked natural things to metaphors about humanity. So while Storm on the Island might be just about a storm on an island, there is probably something underneath it that is exploring humanity in more detail. But it's up to you. It's one of those ones that, unlike perhaps London, where clearly the poet is unhappy with what he's seeing, this is open to interpretation as to what the additional thing might be, or it could very simply be about a storm on an island. So let's start to go through this. I read it in a very specific way. You may see it read differently in other places, as I said, because it's up to you how far you interpret the metaphor. But if we take it as a basic sort of as a storm on the island, the first line, we are prepared. Firstly, the pronoun we, meaning that it's not just him, it's a group of people. But we are prepared, and then we have the caesura, the sort of the colon here, to stop that first sentence directly. It's a very clear statement of intent. We are prepared. So whatever happens after that, with regards to the storm, they don't particularly worry about it. They say they build their houses squat. They knew the storm was coming. It's small, it's ugly. They're not big, lavish buildings that are designed to look nice. They're designed to be functional within this kind of environment where a storm comes every so often, it would seem. And he talks about, he uses the adjective wizened or wizened earth, the idea that he kind of respects the earth. He kind of, even though the earth is effectively creating this weather pattern that is causing them problems, he, as we probably should, and as you've seen in other poems, they respect nature and they do kind of respect the power of nature in particular. He kind of makes a bit of a joke here, sort of almost sarcastic, as if, the earth was so clever that it never allowed them to have much hay or many trees. So when the wind does kick up, there's nothing to destroy anything, and there's nothing that can be lost, really. So he kind of plays off this idea that, the earth is almost so clever that it knows it's going to destroy things, so it leaves things in a way that, causes less destruction, if anything. It's interesting here as well. We get this kind of feeling. He uses an aside. Even the word blast. Blast here is talking about the obviously the noise of the storm, but it is also sort of has two meanings. The idea of potentially getting frustrated with something, saying blast about something, and he even says, "You know what I mean." He is talking to us. It makes it feel more personal. This is not a poem that is meant to be just out there for anyone to read. He's trying to make it seem as if he is discussing this idea with us. He talks about the idea of the chorus in a gale, and I read this that he almost links it to the idea of the beauty of nature here, even when it is, destroying things, blowing, the winds are pounding us that. There's a beauty within that he is trying to talk about. And actually, when they're prepared, he almost forgets that actually the thing you fear, is pummeling your house too. And you can kind of hear it and it's out there. And you maybe forget about how dangerous it can be because you have been prepared for it in some ways. The poem gets, as the poem goes on, the storm actually gets worse. He talks about it, kind of the preparation at the top, and as he moves down, the descriptions are more violent and more aggressive. But because he's prepared himself, as is everyone else, he doesn't see it as perhaps as dangerous as it could be. I mean, even the idea of the oxymoron here, the exploding comfortably down on the cliffs. Exploding, very violent, but comfortably down on the cliffs implies that it's far away from him and he's not in any danger. We have the simile that quite a lot of kids remember when it comes to revision. Spits like a tame cat turns savage. The idea of a tame cat, often lovely, wonderful, yet suddenly the wind picks up, the storm happens, and it spits like a tame cat turns savage. To me, it's interesting. I always say it downplays the power of the storm in some ways, because even a tame cat turned savage isn't as dangerous perhaps as other animals that he could have linked it to, but it does help to build up this sense of the tame life that they lead on a day-to-day basis, and then the suddenness of the move from kind of that tame life to the storm. He uses a lot of the semantic field of like warfare, and specifically almost like I'd say the air warfare, effectively dives, strafes, salvo, bombarded, all link it to the idea of it being like an army or like an air force, it seems. But I find the last line most interesting because it kind of a bit like the "we are prepared" at the start. It kind of underpins the meaning for me. Strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. If you are prepared for something and you're sitting in your house and the storm, destroys everything around you but leaves you more or less safe, you're not. What are you scared of? Now, if we read this as a storm on the island, and that's what it's about the storm, he is basically saying about being prepared and how kind of useful that is in terms of helping you out and making sure that you don't sort of suffer or things don't get destroyed or you don't get hurt. This is where the alternative meanings, potentially the metaphors that he might be exploring here, potentially because he lives in Ireland, he could be talking about politics. The sort of the political house, but like the Houses of Parliament here, is called Stormont. So the idea of storm on the island is a bit of wordplay based on that, perhaps. So he could be talking about the idea that the politics, the changing nature of politics, the changing nature of government is something that we worry about, perhaps. And actually, if we're prepared for it, we should know. I'm not so sure about that one personally myself, though I do think there is a potential analysis that looks at it as a religious poem. The idea being that actually he would have been brought up in quite a religious environment, quite a religious society. So the idea that he's talking about the huge nothing that we fear possibly might be him questioning religion. The idea being that actually, if we're prepared, whatever that might be in terms of religion, maybe we shouldn't be so worried about, could be God, could be the afterlife, could be anything. As I said, it could be just as simple as a storm on an island and being prepared for that. It's completely up to you, and it's a great poem because of that, because it allows you to interpret it the way you see it. Now, like I've done in the past, just very quickly, sort of a summary of it. Sort of Storm on the Island is about a house on an island getting attacked by a storm. The extended metaphor is about how we shouldn't be afraid of things if we are well prepared for them. It says here, power and conflict. If you're wondering how it fits within power and conflict, we have the power of nature, the storm itself, but there's almost the battle between nature and man that we also see at this point as well. Okay, before I finish, just trying to have a quick look at the structure of it. We have talked a little bit about the asides, the idea of the sort of conversational tone, and that is kind of helped by the use of enjambment. A lot of the sentences, I mean, at the start less so when he's just stating how things are, but as the sort of storm grows, as you get to lines 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth, enjambment continues to sort of build up this pace and this sense of speed and sort of power. Also, one stanza, so one stanza, one storm, a specific poem about the storm that he's talking about, perhaps, or it might link to the idea of the power. It could even link to the houses themselves, these squat, single level houses. Again, it comes up to you how you see it. And as you go further down, we have there's more caesura and there's more punctuation at the end when he's describing the storm like an army, like an air force. So it sort of leads us to pausing at certain points. It leads it to be a bit more staccato, a little bit more sort of like we're stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And it might, be linking to the idea of sort of the power of the wind and the storm itself. Anyway, that's Storm on the Island. I said it's a useful one because it is, in terms of the narrative, quite straightforward. There's some really, really good and sort of techniques that stand out. Structure and language and imagery are all there. Do go away and make sure you learn it. As always, any questions, concerns, do let me know, and I'll put up some more videos later in the week. Okay, bye.